Good morning or afternoon, depending on your time zone. I'm Janie Montblanc, and on behalf of the Great Basin Fire Science Exchange and our partners, I would like to welcome you to this webinar, Fuel Breaks in Practice, presented by Keith Barker with the Bureau of Land Management in Carson City and Lance Okeson with the Bureau of Land Management in Boise. This webinar is the fifth in our Fuel Break series this month, and I'll bring up that screen so you can see. Our last webinar is going to be next Wednesday, and it will be a discussion between ecologists and managers summarizing where we are with fuel breaks today and how we move forward together. For details and registration, please visit our website at greatbasinfirescience.org. Before I introduce our presenters, I'll go over some webinar details. We are using Zoom webinar as our platform, and its only drawback is that attendees can't see other attendees. So if you would like, please choose the panelists and everyone drop-down option in your chat, and then enter your name and affiliation so that we have a better sense of a webinar community. We will also be using the chat for questions, so please type in your questions at any time, and I'll field them to the speakers after the presentations. Now I'd like to welcome our presenters. Keith Barker is a fire ecologist with the Bureau of Land Management in Carson City District, and will discuss a fuels treatment success story in the Pine Nut Mountains of Nevada. Lance Okeson is the fuels program lead with the Bureau of Land Management Boise District, and will discuss successes and challenges with a suite of fuel breaks projects. Thank you both for joining us today.
Good morning, good afternoon.
All right, now Keith, you should be able to see your share screen button.
There we go.
Great.
And first we'll set the stage here, talk about a little bit about myself, and then a couple fires we've had in the Pine Nut Mountains. So the Carson City District manages BLM land, essentially from north of Reno down to Topaz Lake, all along what we call the Sierra Front, out to about Austin. So about 4.8 million acres here in the western side of Nevada. Again, my name is Keith Barker. I'm the fire ecologist currently / fuel specialist for the district. I spent the first half of my career in wildland suppression, fighting fire all over the western United States. And for the last 16 years have been a fuel specialist and the fire ecologist here, designing and implementing vegetation treatments in order to modify fire behavior to protect values at risk, both wildland urban interface as well as high value habitat further away from infrastructure. So what we're going to talk about today is a success story, certainly. The Numbers Fire started in 2020 in July, and it burned into what we call the Pine Nut Road fuels treatment. So we need to step back a little bit in time for fuel break development. And this doesn't happen overnight. This started 16 years ago as an idea in 2004. As far as we've got roughly 700 people that live in the community of Fish Springs outside of Gardnerville, Nevada. And it's essentially a one-way in, one-way out road system into these communities. So what you can see on your screen in green is the eventual treatment. Early on in 2004, the communities, the local fire departments, and the BLM identified this area needing treatment. We worked together, which is important. If you don't work together, you're never going to get anything done that's going to be successful if and when you need it during a fire. So along this road originally in 2005, we originally went in and treated the vegetation within 100 feet, approximately along the road system, initially to create a corridor if and when you had a fire coming from the southwest. Our fires generally move from the southwest to the northeast in this area. So when they had a fire in that area, if they needed to evacuate, they would have a safer way to get back down into the community of Gardnerville and out from in front of the fire. So this is just a general map here with the fire on it. And then in and around these communities, and we'll be discussing these with some pictures, but I wanted to just set this up before we started that. So I'm going to stop share, and then, okay, so we should have pictures now. Is that correct, Shanae?
Yep, looks great.
Outstanding. I've successfully completed probably the hardest part of this Zoom meeting for me. So in and along the pine nut roads, these are pre-treatment pictures of the vegetation along the road system. You can see it's a bunch grass, sagebrush, pinyon juniper pine coming down onto the flats. And again, this is outside of Gardnerville, Nevada. So this is a pre-picture, and then this will be the post picture in approximately the same place. We use photo point monitoring to evaluate effectiveness over time. So this was back in 2005, the original treatment. A second area, you can see in years that we're not having precipitation, you're not going to see that annual grass load. It is in the system, but in the dry years, we don't see it. So primarily pinyon juniper with scattered brush. And there again, that's the after effect. And this was a masticator that did this work in and along Pine Nut Road. A third picture with a little bit more brush on this linear feature, and then scattered trees. And then the after effect. Now, when we treat these things, we don't just treat and walk away. We found over time that in our systems here, or in this geographic area, after about 6 years, you start losing field treatment effectiveness. So this treatment here has been maintained twice since its original treatment, most recently in 2018. Here's the original treatment. Again, it's just 100 feet on each side of the roads. We leave, in the early 2000s, it was a struggle to get buy-in from the public and the local cooperators to modify vegetation in order to get to field breaks. And then over the last 15 to 20 years, with the fire histories we've had both locally and regionally, we're gaining that acceptance in and around our urban interface to create these field break features. They do work. We use different methods to get rid of the material depending on the place. This one is within close proximity to people and population. So where it was available and where it made sense, we would cut the rounds, leave them for wood, and people would buy permits and collect firewood as a fuel wood or a biomass component. In other areas, we would use mastication to start the decomposition process and move the material along the way, leaving a better place that would modify fire behavior with a mastication material as opposed to a lop and scatter treatment, which this would be similar to. There again along the road in 2005. Again, different areas. We did leave a tree component with a spacing in and along the roads, mainly for a visual component. Over time, people were more willing to have more trees removed. So as we move forward, we did increase our tree take per treatment. Again, just examples of the road. Okay, so going back, this is 2005. In Gardnerville in the southern Pine Nut area, we experienced a number of large-scale fires in and around this area coming up until 2008. And in 2008, we started looking at that spacing component and thinking we're not going wide enough. So again, working with the communities and the partners, we did a publicity campaign, talked with the folks and tried to if BLM is going to come in and do treatment on federal land, then you really need to do treatment on your property as well. It's a team effort, and we drove that home and got the buy-in. And then along Pine Nut Road, there's also a community fish springs, which would be over to the north a little bit. That'll come into play. And this is the vegetation pre-treatment in and around an 80-acre piece where there are homes. You can see the horizontal and vertical continuity. The topography is relatively flat, but given red flag scenarios coming off of a fire start to the southwest, these people would certainly be concerned and need to be looking at options. So in working with this community, here again, this is the community, you can see the roofs barely through the treatment, or excuse me, barely through the canopy there. And trying to address that problem, we worked with them and created the Bluebird. This is the Bluebird community. Here's Pine Nut Road. There again, this is 2018, realizing we needed to go bigger. This is an aerial shot of the community where they have done some work. And then you can see the horizontal and the vertical spacing we've created on the BLM around the community in order to modify fire behavior should it ever come towards this community or along Pine Nut Road. When you look at it from the ground, pinyon juniper, if you can't see down on it, you're not going to see this linear feature. You only see these linear features when you're looking at it from the air. So looking back at it now, we try to design our field breaks now where it's got more of a wavy, non-linear component to try to break it into the landscape a little bit better, so it's visually not an issue, and then we get a little more buy-in from the communities. So the Bluebird project is over here. This is the Pine Nut Road project. And now we're looking at it a couple days after July 6th, 2020. July 6th, 2020, approximately 7 o'clock at night, 4 miles to the southwest along the 395 corridor, a fire started. Red flag conditions, July, windy, hot, blowing. The fire moved 4 hours in the next 3 hours. So approximately 10 o'clock at night, this is a post-fire picture, but you can see the fire in here and you can see where it came in and it blew in and it burned into the fuel break. And the fuel break on the west side worked as it was designed. The fire burned into the break, it modified, it went to ground. Fire suppression resources were successful in getting that area controlled and could continue suppression efforts further up the road and into communities that are further along Pine Nut Road. Excuse me. So these are flight pictures taken after the fire, but it's essentially a run that will run from the west to the east, just identifying both the fuels treatment, the fire coming into the fuels treatment, closed canopy, pinyon juniper, wind-driven fire, and then you can see an example of the non-treated vegetation over here to the north. Again, the fire burns in and it burns to ground, and they were able to do the suppression. Okay, further in here's a structure. A lot of effort was taken. The structure survived with the suppression efforts, and the fire continued to move to the north and to the east along the fuel break. I think pictures really do this justice more than me just talking and repeating myself each time. So I'll pause a couple seconds for each picture just to give people an idea. And if I didn't say at the beginning, I appreciate all of you people interested in modification of fire vegetation and creating field breaks, and thanks for listening. So as the fire continued to the east and to the north, it burned into the Spirit Ranch property or area. You can see that the urban interface is in here. It did come across the fuel break at its narrowest point and jumped the road and burned into this area. A lot of good work has been done by the private landowners to protect and fire safe their houses. And with the suppression efforts, we were mostly successful as it went to ground and came in here. We did, however, lose one primary structure, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. You can see how the fire progressed. And then this, once it, this is all untreated up here, Pine Nut Road heads off this way to the north, and the fire did continue up to the south. The fire did continue to the north and to the east until we got around it a few days later into the non-treated areas. Okay, so where it came across. Unfortunately, like I said, we did lose a primary structure during the suppression effort. Working along Pine Nut Road, this was an area that we tried to get as much as we could completed. However, it was a little bit thinner. And what you can see here is private property that it was untreated versus private property that was treated, and then a structure that did survive the fire. So field breaks do work, as well as fireproofing in and around your houses. So what options do we have when we don't do the pre-treatments or creating these fire breaks? Like I said, they take a long time. It takes a while to get buy-in from the communities. They just don't happen overnight. So once it got past the field break and further up into the hills, it was more of an air show with closed canopy pinyon juniper driving up the slope. You need consistent retardant as well as heavy helicopters. We had a water source close by. We have the Reno, Sparks. The Stead Air Base is close. So we do have quite an operation that comes to fight these fires, but it takes a lot more effort on the suppression side if we don't have these pre-identified, pre-treated areas to help us with modifying fire behavior during suppression activities. So those are examples of going in with dozers, helicopters, retardant, in order to put fire line in to control these fires. So what did it look like after the fire up close? You can see here where the fire came in. The field break did its job. There still is existing bunch grasses, still is existing brush. Some trees are still there. So we have a component that has made it through the fire and can be a seed source to continue and revegetate the area. But this one worked. So I want to jump back in time a little bit for the second success story and wrap my story up. This is in Smith Valley, which is on the eastern side of the pine nuts, southern pine nuts there. This is 2011, September 30th. It looks pretty bad. And this is a lightning start fire that is starting to generate energy and blowing down into the community of Smith Valley. Now, the success part of this story is, and what you can't tell from these pictures with the fire start, is it's on BLM right now. Like I said, the fire was September 30th, 2011. The previous winter, spring, we were able to put in a little over 1,000 acres of a field treatment called the Upper Colony treatment right in behind these communities. So here you can see where the fire came into the community. Here you can see the BLM land with modified vegetation, spacing between the trees, mowing. The field treatment did what it was supposed to do. It modified fire behavior, and we were able to put a line around the fire as it dropped to the ground the night it came into Smith Valley. And I personally was on this and watched this happen. So again, another success story, and we need to tell our stories. So they get out there and we don't have the large scale fire activity that's going on and losing high values at risk, both wildland urban interface and high value habitat. Again, another shot of the community and the BLM land and how it just came to ground. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and address questions later. And again, I appreciate and thank you for your time today.
Great. Thank you so much, Keith. That was neat to look at all those photos. So Lance, if you would like to go ahead and share your screen.
Well, thanks for having me. Again, my name's Lance Okeson. I work here at the Boise District in the Fields program. I've been here since 2007. And, over the last 14 years that I've been here, field breaks have become a big part of this program. I wanted to kind of go through some slides here that I put together, and I'd been watching some of these other presentations earlier on, Jeff Rose and those kind of things. They did an excellent job of talking about what field breaks are and all that kind of thing. One thing that jumped out at me though on this whole series was that I don't think anybody's really looking at the big picture in regards to what field break strategies and how they fit into our fire suppression organization and efforts over basically the whole Western United States. And I just wanted to touch that real quick because I was hoping that, any managers, authorized officers that manage public lands or private lands. I think you get kind of lost in the rhetoric in regards to fuel breaks. Fuel breaks are basically managing fuel strategically on the landscape. And again, we have a fire problem in the West. I think everybody agrees with that. Like Jeff was saying on his presentation, it's not so much that we're getting more fires, it's that the fires that we are getting, some of them are going huge. And what's going on there is basically, we failed to manage our fuels strategically and at a landscape level in the last, let's just say 40, 50 years, we've really walked away from that. And right now, this three-legged stool, we've put most of our money and our time and efforts into the suppression leg. And now we're starting to put our time and effort into this fuels management strategically, which is, fuel breaks. But I would challenge us that if we really want to fix this problem, all three of these things have to be engaged, and it's really a package. Fuel breaks in and of themselves aren't very effective without the fire community engaged in them. In fact, they don't work much at all, especially all the fuel breaks we're putting in are all vegetated fuel breaks, just like with Keith. He has an excellent example of a fuel break that they built. And with the fire community engaged, they were able to make those fuel breaks effective and protect those communities. And that just highlights everything. So I just wanted to touch that really quick. I was going to focus on kind of how we approach building a fuel break strategy, because I think that's something that a lot of people are struggling with. Managers, again, that are district managers, field office managers, those kind of things. They know they got a fire problem. They know fuel breaks are one leg of that stool. But they're like, well, where do you put them? And that kind of thing. And I think they can get hung up on that. And I think they can overthink that because it's really a lot simpler than it is. For a fuel break to be effective and do what we want it to do, it's got to really meet four things. And again, it's got to be at the landscape level. And for me, landscape means at a minimum horizon to horizon. We manage landscapes. And if whatever you're doing with your fuel breaks isn't from one horizon to another, I think you're not in the game in regards to our fire issues and what we're doing and the fire issue that we're dealing with. So it's got to be at the landscape level. Any fuel break's got to be strategic. The key is it's got to be where firefighters want them and they're going to believe in them. Because if that's not where firefighters are going to use them and they don't believe in them, they won't be used. And all your effort and best intentions is really for nothing. And so it's really about the fire community when it comes to fuel breaks and the locations. Fuel breaks, they got to be timely. And I know that seems kind of silly, but it really becomes apparent when you start talking about using grazing to establish fuel breaks. There's a lot of people that are looking at grazing and it's legit. We're doing a lot of it ourselves to manage fuel loads. And but the thing is, your grazing treatment has to be there for fire season. And there's a lot of people that are looking at winter grazing up in our country. And the problem with winter grazing is you can graze and you can reduce fuels and you can do all that really cool stuff, but it's all going to regrow in the spring. And in August is really when we're losing these huge fires and we're losing a lot of habitat. So again, your whatever your treatment is, it's got to be there when the fire comes. And that mean in our country, it means July, August, September. And then again, economically, logistically feasible. And again, that seems like a no-brainer, but really it's getting at, you know, if we're going to put in all these fuel breaks across the landscape, we're going to have a better source of funding, and it's got to be a continuous source of funding, because maintenance is a big part of these fuel breaks. So they're not a one and done. Keith already hit on that with his, you know, return cycle in regards to maintenance, and we've got the same issues. Again, I just can't reiterate enough that, you know, here's where we're at literally with our fuels on a landscape level. And this is where we need to be if we're going to be successful. And that is, we have to manage our fuels. This is where we've been for years, and that's why we're failing and having these huge fires. And we need to at least minimum strategically have fuels breaks in like this so we can modify that fire behavior. And you know, on some of those earlier presentations also, I think something that's getting lost is that we are building fuel breaks for the 3% of the fires that are going big. And because we're already catching 97% of the fires, we're not going to build fuel breaks for fires we're already catching. And so again, when you think about fuel breaks, go big. I think we'll be more successful. I was going to give you some thoughts on how we approached our fuel break strategy here on the Boise District. And you know, hopefully that'll maybe give some folks some ideas on how they might want to do it or approach theirs. By no means am I saying this is the only way to do it, because I really believe in every district is different, and they should approach things differently and uniquely based on their local politics and how things are organized on their districts. So again, if you're looking at putting in a fuel break strategy or fuel breaks on the district, I think these are some of the things that you need to be thinking about. And, you know, what's your fire history? Where do you get a lot of starts? That seems like a no-brainer. And we'll go through some maps here on the Boise District on what drove a lot of our decision processes on how we designed our fuel break strategies. And of course, like Keith was talking about, you know, wildland urban interface areas are going to drive a lot of your decision stuff, your communities, values, habitats. We kind of got the same thing as Carson does. We've got a lot of these coming together on our district and driving those priorities. But basically, at the end of the day, it really amounts to what's really important to you on your district. And it may be something different, and it may drive how you design and implement a fuel break strategy on your district. And by all means, that should be the main thing. One of the things that I think that a lot of people are getting confused on is that if a fuel break is going to be effective, it's got to be along an existing road. And there's so many different things I could go into that why that, but bottom line is that the fuel break, besides providing a break in fuel continuity and modifying fire behavior, like Keith was pointing out, it's also allows the flow and access of the fire community up and down that fuel break when you're fighting fire. And you could see that in Keith's pictures. You could see how the fire came down to that fuel break. And if you could just imagine when it was going, I'm sure there was resources all along that fuel break, moving up and down it and catching spots and doing those kind of things. So here's what we started out with on the Boise District. This is an ignitions map. And this is basically, you know, since we've been basically taking points of origin and basically investigating whether it was a natural ignition or a human caused. So any red dot on this thing is a human caused fire. And then of course the yellow ones, which don't show up very good, are our lightning points of origin. And again, the thing that jumps out at you, of course, is Boise. And then of course, this is I-84. And then this is the railroad. And you can see how the human ignitions really are focused in one around the community, but also along the existing roads and stuff like that. So again, that ignition map was helping us focus, you know, some of our efforts. This is back to that fire polygon map. that again, where are we having the fires and where are they reoccurring and stuff like that. And again, this is something that I think anybody would naturally look at. Again, here's Boise, here's I-84 going down to Glens Ferry like this. And as you can see, this is an absolute war zone. And this was basically driving most of our resource it was basically a resource sink for us, that we were constantly having fires out there almost every other day during the summer. And then as lightning comes onto our district, it comes from the south. And you'd get fires down here, which is our Sage-Grouse, sage steppe stronghold. But it would still come across here and have lightning. And this was always driving everything, because we always prioritize our fires, life, property, resource. So we would be trying to respond to fires down here, but since life and property was always driving this response, we were getting hung up here. And so, we realized that we've got to fix this problem if we're going to succeed down here. There's no way we can just drive by while houses burn to go down here and put out fires in the really remote stuff. Again, so that was driving a lot of our decision process, and you'll see that when you see where our fuel breaks are here in a minute. Now, the other side was the resource side, right? Now we had that. Here's where we have our major fire load. It's really the Snake River Plain. But again, with the sage-grouse, sagebrush steppe issues that we're all facing in the Great Basin, this area right here, we knew resource-wise was an area that we didn't want to have a lot of big fires. And that we also knew that we didn't really have the ability to, once we got down into that country, there really wasn't nothing to work from, okay? And that's why we wanted to put a fuel break strategy in down there. And you'll see that in a minute. This is called a limb map. It's a landscape importance model. And the darker the colors is, the more important sagebrush steppe habitat it is for grouse. And this is just kind of zooming in on it again. And so that was another thing that was driving another strategy. We have 3 strategies going on in the Boise District. Here's a Great Basin map of basically the tri-state area. Again, this is a document we just finished up. Basically, again, that tri-state fuel break strategy, and I'll show you how these lay on the landscape after that. And again, ignitions alone don't tell a story. I see a lot of people getting focused on that. And by all means, it does drive a big part of your decision process. But don't forget this, and that's the logistics of fighting fire. And that is, how are you going to get folks in and into the fires, and then how are you going to support them once they're there, and that kind of thing. And fuel breaks provide access and a place for the fire community, and it helps that logistics of firefighting. So they're really critical for that. So again, back to our Boise District map. Again, this was the area that we had. We have our fire load, and then this is the area down here that we realize we don't want much more fire in, because it's such high quality in regards to sagebrush steppe, and we showed that on that limb model, right? So here's what we've come up with to date. The first strategy we started was what we call the paradigm. And again, it's back to that. Here's the Boise and the I-84. And this is what we really have to fix if we're going to succeed down here and down here. So we did a document with that. All our fuel breaks are along existing roads, the better roads in the area. And you can see the polygons here are a lot smaller versus these ones that are more out in the remote area. And that's a natural response because we have more roads to work with, and we want to keep our polygons smaller because we have communities in amongst them and stuff like that. Now, when we get down here into this country, it's really remote, and we wanted to put some fuel breaks in, but at a way less, smaller density, much bigger polygons. And again, we're trying to keep fires from going to 300,000 acres, that we're willing to give up a little ground for less disturbance in regards to putting in these fuel breaks than we would up here, which has been burned repeatedly. This fuel break strategy right here is the soda fuel breaks, and it was a response from the soda fire in 2015. And it burned 280,000 acres, and it really affected a lot of communities, a lot of ranchers and stuff like that. So we put a lot of effort and ESR investments into this. So we put a fuel break strategy in there to help keep it from reburning, basically. But all three of these strategies are linked together. So again, back to, we've got to succeed here if we're going to have resources to put down here on the, you know, the resource side of it. So this is life, property, and resource driving everything here. Down here, a lot of it's resource driven, but all three of them are linked together if we're going to succeed at a landscape level. A couple of things, you know, in regards to fuel breaks as we've gone about implementing, I just wanted to touch on is again, money is limiting. We really need a lot more funding. Everybody does, coming down through the national level if we're really going to address this problem at the right scale. And then don't forget, we're going to have to maintain all these things also. And that's one of the most controversial things that we found working with communities, the researchers, stuff like that is not so much that we don't have the tools to implement a fuel break strategy, you know, chemicals for weeds and all those things. It's the fear that the BLM is going to start down the road, stir a lot of things up, and then walk away from them. And that's a legit fear, okay? Because I mean, our budgets come through a political process and things kind of ebb and flow, as you know. So one of the things that I think when you're implementing any of these fuel break strategies is we've got to phase them in over time. There's no way you're going to take on, you know, hundreds of miles of fuel break and implement them all at one time. So we're phasing in little parts of each one of these strategies over time, again, prioritizing within those strategies, what's the most important ones, and then just building on that. We're, you know, most of our fuel breaks are 200 feet each side of an existing road. So you got a 400-foot footprint. We're just taking off the first, in some cases, 50 feet or 100 feet and trying to get that established, get the weeds dealt with before we go into the next 100 feet. So again, you're phasing things in. We've prioritized the roads usually that are being maintained to the highest standard. So in other words, if you have a highway versus a county road, obviously the highway is the first ones we're going to be implementing. Again, those are ones that are already being maintained to a standard that we want. And one of the things that's been really successful for us that'll help your dollars go farther is we've entered into agreements with the counties and their highway departments, where we're actually taking our fuels dollars, putting them into these agreements so they can access those dollars and they can work on the roads that they're already maintaining to a high standard, and they can actually do more in the borrow pits and stuff like that. What we saw was that a lot of these highway districts weren't maintaining the adjacent borrow pit and right away because they just didn't have the money to. They were focusing all their time just on the road surface. And I can understand that. That's what I'd do if I had unlimited dollars. So we come along and we have given some additional funding, and they've been buying tractors and mowers and stuff like that. And now they're working outside what they normally do and reestablishing those bare aprons and that kind of stuff. And it's been a fantastic success story, especially on I-84 and stuff like that. And then again, I can't get away from this, and that is if we're going to do these fuel breaks, and we're going to do them at a landscape level, and we're going to fix this problem in the Great Basin, we've got to have a steady stream of funding to establish these things, but it's got to also account for maintenance, because the maintenance is going to be just as expensive as the establishing those fuel breaks. And then the other thing is that all these fuel breaks, you need to plan and expect for failure in regards to your treatments. A lot of these things we're working in some really degraded environments, and it's going to take multiple years, multiple treatments, and you're going to have failures here and there. And you know what? You need to expect that, and everybody needs to understand it and go, you know what? We'll get it right the next time, or the conditions will be better the next time. And you will get them established and you'll get there. But if you're just a one and done mentality, I think you're setting yourself up for basically a short run and a lot of failure. But I think we need to change the way we think about this entire process or this entire effort in lengths of careers, not years. In other words, it's going to take multiple careers to get this all straightened out. It took us multiple careers to get where we're at. And so to fix it and turn it around, it's going to take multiple careers of people being engaged, focused, and staying on task. So that's really all I had in regards to, how we're doing fuel breaks, basically how we came up with our strategies. Why are we working in those certain areas? This is a great photo here of where everything's coming together. This is kind of the gold standard of a fuel break. You got a surface of a road that's your breaking fuel continuity. The county's maintaining this borrow pit to free dirt. It's fantastic. Out here, this is one of our fuel breaks out on the Snake River Plain in the Paradigm area. And this is a non-native vegetation, but basically you've got, as the fire moves into this, it's going to burn into this. This is forage kochia, and it's really going to break apart the fire and drop the fire behavior. And it's going to be easy to pick up and hold on this road. So this is the kind of thing that we're looking for as a finished product. And that's all I had.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, so if you have questions for Keith or Lance, please type them in the chat and I will forward them. First question, Lance, earlier presentations in this series described areas of high resistance and resilience as lowest priority for fuel breaks. You described an alternative approach when addressing resource values in the southwest part of the state, high R&R, leading to mixed messages about where the strategy might be appropriate. Can you talk a bit more about why that guidance from the earlier presentation is not applicable here? You described fuel breaks as requiring firefighters to be successful. How does the strategy being implemented in your district address that?
Well, I'm not sure I understand the question. The second part I do, but are they saying that the stuff in the southwest corner should be a higher priority? Is that what they're saying? Somebody or what?
I think just Keith was talking about fuel breaks to protect home. This is what I'm reading into the question. And then, okay. And so you were bringing that up too about the, the biggest problem being around the urban areas, but then you're also saying that the next priority after life and property is resources. And so what I'm reading into this question is, how do those two things differ?
Okay, well, I mean, one of the things is we've got a fire problem all over the district. Okay, and we have areas that are basically repeated burning, threatening communities constantly, right? So we addressed that kind of as our first priority, and that was that Snake River Plain area. And then, but again, we're looking at the district as a whole. That wasn't the end of it. It was, well, now wait a minute, we've got all this potential listing of sage-grouse. One of the issues there, not all the issues, but one of the issues there again is these large fires and converting a lot of that existing sagebrush steppe over to something that is not as good for sage-grouse. So we need to protect that also. And so we're trying to do all kinds of things at the same time. And so that's why we're working on different places on the district. So yeah, but the priorities are always life, property, resource. But resource, remember, is what we really manage as a public agency. The life and property is things that we deal with all the time, but we're not building houses and we're not living out there on the landscape and stuff. So we have to come up with a strategy that addresses all those things, right? I hope that hits on the mark. I'm not sure if I understood it, but that's how we ended up where we're at.
He actually provided some clarification that I guess in a previous webinar, it was said that high resistance and resilience were low priority areas for fuel breaks, but in your district.
Oh, I got you. Okay. Yeah, no, yeah. I've heard that. No, there's people that have that viewpoint. They aren't me, obviously. I think, But yeah, no, there is a lot of people that think that. And in fact, there's people that just flat say you shouldn't be putting any fuel breaks down in that southwest corner. Absolutely. No, there's a lot of people that believe that. We don't agree with that at all, because we're trying to walk that line between putting enough fuel breaks out there in that piece of ground, that southwest corner, to provide our fire community the ability to succeed at a certain level. But we realize we're trying to balance that with not going overboard and just putting fuel breaks all over out there. And we're trying to balance that with the ecological need of that big piece of ground plus the firefighting need. And that's why you see the bigger polygons. Some of those polygons are hundreds of thousands of acres, versus up on the Paradigm, up on the Snake River Plain, you're looking at a 10,000 acre polygon for the most part, all those polygons. So that's why you kind of see a difference in that density. We're trying to walk that line between what's legit and going to give us a chance to not have a 500,000 acre fire and keep it down to a 60,000 acre, right?
Yeah. Thank you. Have you used a native plant successfully in fuel breaks along roadsides?
Yeah, in the higher elevation, you bet. I mean, and if you're the stuff on the Snake River Plain is really tough. Most of our country on the Snake River Plain on that Paradigm is below 3,000 feet. It's at 3,000 feet or below. And it's really the kind of the lowest, driest, drouthiest part of the Snake River Plain, going from east to west across Idaho. And natives have not been very successful out there. Now, if you go to the tri-state, that will primarily be natives in the higher elevations, because again, you're getting onto better sites, you're deeper soils, you got more precip. And again, as you go up in elevation, generally you go up in precip and you get into better sites. And that's where we are totally using all natives in our fuel breaks. So again, depending on the site conditions and that are driven by elevation and aspect and those kind of things, we're doing different things. But the Snake River Plain, it's a tough situation because we're really starting on it's compromised ecologically. It's burned so many times and converted over to a lot of annuals. And it's a tough go. So we've had to use a lot of, or basically our primary deal out there is going to be the Forage Kochia fuel break. But as you go up in elevation and in those better sites, like in that tri-state corner, yeah, the natives are going to be our primary species we're trying to put in the fuel breaks.
Great, thanks. You mentioned that Forage Kochia is a good makes for a good fuel break, and so there's a question about is it good at reducing fire flame lengths?
Yeah, it is. I have a really good, I think I had it in my presentation. Is there a way I can share my screen again and show you a slide? Because I get this Forage Kochia question a lot. And I want to show you so you're looking at it horizontally across it. And it looks like it has a lot more continuity than what there is. Well, actually what I need to do is, I don't know if I can do this. Anyways, I have a picture of it looking down into it as you're standing there. And basically what Kochia does is it's really good at cleaning out the interspaces between plants. Really what it does is it provides a plant community like the Great Basin sagebrush steppe used to before cheatgrass came along and filled all the interspaces, right? And so what happens is it cleans out all the interspaces between the plants, and then as the fire moves into it, your flame lengths and your rate of spread drop a lot. Yeah. And then again, we like to have our fuel breaks grazed, whether they're Kochia or natives, which further modifies and drops that fire behavior also. Yeah.
Great, thanks. Another question for you, Lance. What's that?
If I could add to that,
yeah, please.
Kochia also stays greener longer into the fire season. So it's not, it doesn't burn as early as the cheatgrass fires. So you do limit some of the fire behavior just because it is greener longer into the season.
Right on. Great. Yeah. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Another question for you, Lance. Can you describe how fuel break designs are incorporating recommendations from Sage-Grouse biologists to avoid, minimize, or mitigate impacts to sage-grouse?
Well, we're following all the, so in regards to implementation, you know, we have to, most of our implementation is in the fall. We do a few things in the spring, but it's very limited. Again, and that's part of, you know, ARPA, the recommendations and stuff like that. In regards to the actual design of the fuel break, they are compatible with the ARPA. We've gone through the ARPA reviews and with all of our documents, the latest one being Tri-State. You know, our ARPA in Idaho allows for fuel breaks. Actually, you know, sees the value of fuel breaks and fuel treatments on the landscape to try to minimize these larger fires. And so, again, we're trying to carry that out with the intent of being, you know, not to have these huge landscape fires that are converting a lot of habitat all in one big event. Yeah. Yeah.
This is probably a question to both of you. Someone said that they heard at one point BLM was moving away from forage kochia, but it sounds like it's a great tool. So is that a false rumor?
Yeah, it is. Again, I think maybe what somebody's thinking at is that BLM is trying to promote the use of natives over non-natives. And let's not worry about whether it's crested wheat or kochia or those kind of things. That would be true, yes. We're trying to use natives always as a first choice. But if you read any of that policy, there's always a sentence in there that says, well, if that's not going to work, if it's been proven to not be effective, you know, you can use non-natives. And that's where we're at on certain sites. You know, we're at the low end on the ecology scale. And again, if we're ever going to move forward with restoring, you know, the Snake River Plain, we have to stop the fire cycle. And so we had to do something that in some people's eyes was extreme, and that was use a non-native in our fuel breaks. Now you have the rest of the landscape that is open for all your restoration efforts, and you know, that's fantastic. Again, fuel breaks are there to try to minimize the repeated disturbance out there on the Snake River Plain. That's why we're using a non-native there, and that has been very controversial, and it really has, and continues to be. But we are starting to show the results now. So we're starting to get our fuel breaks established out there. They are starting to have a positive impact.
And Lance, if I could add to that, you know, ultimately in these areas that we manage with the cheatgrass fire cycle and the annual invasives, where we have disturbance, we just continue to have problems. So ultimately what we need to do is lengthen the fire return interval in these bunchgrass sagebrush systems and get from years every 1 to 10 years and get back to every 35 to 50 to 100 years if we're going to manage for a pre-European settlement type vegetation on the landscape. So in these areas that are degraded, that are already in an annual state, from the implementation side, what you're hearing from both of us is that we're trying to use whatever we can to get something established, to get something strategic that our suppression resources can use, so that ultimately over time, we're not going to fix it overnight, but over time, we can get back to a fire cycle in these systems and high value habitat that's more representative of what was going on a long time ago.
Great, thanks. There are two great questions I think that would apply to both of you. What native species, well, I guess Lance, you had mentioned this, what native species are you using at higher elevations that you're seeing success with?
Blue bunch wheatgrass is a good one. It's once it gets established, it's really good at occupying. It has a really big root source, and it's good at competition. You know, again, then, and of course you got squirrel tail. There's always a pinch of you know, Sandberg's bluegrass in there, although that's not a deep rooted perennial. It's shallow rooted, and but if you can get a mix of something like that going, you can actually have a pretty decent fuel break at those higher elevations. Yeah.
Are you seeing the same things, Keith?
Yeah, if you think about, when you plant natives or non-natives, what you're trying to create is suppression of annual grasses or denial of resources. So anything you can get established, and Blue Bunch is a great example, it will create that suppression and get you less horizontal continuity, and you've got that space in between plant that'll limit fire behavior and prevent the large scale wildfires.
Great. Next question, is it possible that prescriptive fire along with use of a pre-emergent where necessary could also be used on a fairly large scale to create fuel breaks and greater heterogeneity on a large scale?
I can start with that one. In years, well, obviously with cheatgrass, you've got years with high precip. The precip generates for 2 or 3 years, you get extended growth, and then you've got that thatch. And then across, once you have that 2 years of precip, then with the thatch, that's where you see the larger scale fire history. At least here in Carson, when we do have those higher fuel loads, we did do one project where we came in and we did a prescribed burn to get rid of the thatch first in an annual grassland in order to create a better environment for the pre-emergent. You do get, at least what we've seen here, if you apply something like Plateau, it's got a liquid component of if it's an aerial treatment, 8 gallons per acre with the herbicide. Some of that does get sucked into these existing thatch, and then you see a reduction in your effectiveness of the chemicals. So in years like this where we have drought, we're not seeing an annual load, grass load here in Carson City or on the district. These are the years we kind of look at that our herbicide treatments are going to be more effective. But we have in the past where we have had that thatch layer in and along road systems, we've done a prescribed fire first.
Did you want to add
followed by
anything?
herbicide and then seeding after letting it fallow for a year.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, we've used prescribed fire, and all of our fuel breaks, we have the authority to use prescribed fire as a pre-treatment in regards for chemical and stuff like that, just again to address that issue. Yeah.
Great. Next question, Keith, you talked about the work required to get public buy-in to do the pine nut treatments. What were your methods for doing that?
Early on back in 2005, Nevada had fire safe councils in the communities. So that took someone from the community that wanted to start a fire safe council committee meeting. They would have meetings and generate that support from the community and developing treatments on private land. And what we found successful was finding those fire safe councils in identified areas that were of high risk, and both working with those leaders as well as the local fire departments and the volunteer fire departments. There's having those people that are actually live in those communities that are going to be responding to those fires really helps to generate public support. It really helped early on, and it continues to help now. So we've got fire adapted communities now that in Nevada, and through that process, generating those community plans, that community buy-in, and then we as the federal land managers come in and see what we can do on our side of the fence as well in order to prevent and fire safe those communities.
Great, thanks. Well, we have just a couple more questions, but we're a little bit over time. I think to respect your time, I will, if you don't mind my emailing these questions to you after the fact and then get back in touch with the presenters. Or do you want to hang on a couple more minutes?
Oh, I got time.
What about you, Keith?
Oh, I'm good at offering opinions, so.
All right, great.
Anything that you want to talk about.
Okay, thank you. So the next question, as an alternative to kochia, would non-vegetated fuel breaks, could those be used instead so that invasives aren't being introduced? I imagine that would make a bigger entry point for cheatgrass, but what is your answer for that?
Well, yeah, no, yeah, bare ground is fantastic. Fuel break. It is really costly to maintain. You're almost into that every year, not every other year. The thing about kochia is, and this is the deal. Again, if we're going to put in all these miles of fuel breaks, the maintenance and keeping up on them is the thing that I think a lot of people are missing. It is extremely expensive. Once you get a forage kochia fuel break established in our area at this lower elevation, it's real competitive, and it basically becomes a monoculture in that fuel break. Now we have fuel breaks out here on our piece of ground in the Paradigm that Mike Pellant put in 30 years ago. And those fuel breaks, we haven't put a copper penny into them, and they're still catching fires today. And nobody's done anything to them. And so that's a fuel break that is, once it's established, it's self-generating, and it's there for multiple generations. You talk about a value. That's the kind of fuel breaks I would like to be putting on all over. Now, we aren't going to do that. We're doing that only out here on the Paradigm. But like if we go in that southwest corner, again, we're trying to walk that line between the biological needs in the community and their concerns, but yet giving the fire community something to work with. We're basically looking at a mow out there regard, mowing sagebrush. And our first mow, we've got to come in 2 years later. It responds. It just explodes after. It loves being mowed because you just get it down to some limbs and it really goes. And Jeff was talking about that in that presentation he gave. Really what we want, and it as an end product out there, is we want the brush out of our fuel break, and we want a herbaceous grass load because it's a better, it gives us better fire behavior that we're more successful with.
I'm curious on the back end, like for that's amazing that forage kochia fuel break has lasted 30 years. But on the other side of that, do you have to do any work to prevent it from expanding, or is it kind of staying where it?
Well, we do have a couple of places that it's moved a bit, a couple 100 yards. But for the most part, most of those fuel breaks are right there. They haven't, walked out across the countryside. Now, one of the things that a lot of people are getting confused on is that we spent a lot of years on this district, Boise District, back in the 70s, 80s, and clear into the 90s, putting forage kochia in a lot of our fire rehab mixes. So there's a lot of that kochia around. And I think one of the things that people, in my opinion, mistakenly are thinking is that this kochia is spread all over. Well, when you go back and you look at some of the ESR polygons from years and years and years ago, it was actually part of the seed mixes that they were putting out there for fire rehab. So we've got kochia. I'm finding it up on the Boise front, and you get to talking to the folks, and it's like, yeah, we put that in years ago. And, it was part of the fire rehab mix, and they were putting it in up there. So we got it all over. I'm seeing it on, I've gotten to be real kochia sensitive because everywhere I look, I'm seeing kochia. And it's like, wow, somebody put that in 30, 40 years ago, and it is there, and it's doing what it was supposed to do. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. Thanks. Last question, or second to last, at those higher elevations, does the fuel break design take into account level and location of current invasion of annuals to prevent further disturbance or prevent connecting disturbed areas to non-disturbed areas so that it doesn't increase invasion risk?
I don't think in that regard. So we've got cheatgrass everywhere. And there isn't anywhere you can point on that map on the Boise District that we don't have cheatgrass. Now, I know a lot of people think that those areas are really in, almost pristine, I guess is the word you want to use. But there's cheatgrass out in that country. There's white top on all the roads out there. There's a lot of different weeds. And then our approach is that we're going to establish a fuel break across the landscape. And then we're going to have the tools to treat those issues as they arise, right? So if we have a piece of ground that we're going across, the areas that are in really good condition, that have very little cheatgrass, not no cheatgrass, but very little cheatgrass, most of those areas we can mow if we see a response. of cheatgrass, we can hit with a Mazepec and it cleans them out. And we've had really good success with that. Now in areas that already have, you know, a depauperate understory, or have a lot of cheatgrass already, but have an overstory of sagebrush, and we've got a lot of that in the Great Basin. No, we are mowing through it, and we're going to seed into it and try to change that community over to some kind of perennial. And if you're at the higher elevations, natives are going to be our first choice. And if you're below 3,000 feet on the Snake River Plain, unfortunately, the natives just aren't holding up out there. So it's going to be a non-native. Yeah.
Great, thanks. And just one question, you had mentioned that 40 or 50 years ago, at the very beginning of your presentation, you said 40 or 50 years ago, we kind of went awry in the three legs of keeping fires down. And what was that? Was that funding? What changed?
It's a change in our land use practices. We changed from a culture that you know, using resources on the landscape, whether it was grazing, timber harvest, those kind of things. We've gone into more of a conservation minded thing. You know, we've changed our grazing systems to where we're leaving more fuel on the landscape, and you know, between protecting these areas that normally burn once every either 30 years or you know, 60 or 80, we've missed a lot of those fire cycles. So there's an increase of fuel from that. And then we've reduced a lot of our land use practices, whether it's grazing or logging. And the natural outcome is that we have got a sea of fuel on the landscape, and we're seeing the fire behavior respond to that.
Is it a combination of increased fuel with more people moving out to the wild areas, or?
Well, definitely the more people moving out to the wild areas drives up the cost of fire suppression, because now we're having a lot of resources on a house out in the middle of nowhere where you never had that. And all of a sudden now it ain't nothing to put a couple, you know, $100,000 of retardant around that house. And whereas you would have just went out there with a few engines and caught it. Now we're having to put all these more resources, which more expensive. So yeah, the expansion of the wildland urban interface, and also just these little hobby ranches that have popped up, and they're really prevalent on the Snake River Plain, and these little bedroom communities and stuff. And that's what Keith was showing was, you know, I imagine that's a bedroom community off of Carson. Is that I can't remember the name of the town you were doing there, Keith, but
yeah, both Smith Valley and the Bluebird community.
Yeah. And we're getting that out here in Murphy, Idaho. You drive up behind there, boom, there's 30 houses, and you're like, holy cow, this is going to be a mess when a fire comes through. Yeah, so we're getting it all over.
Yeah. Well, great. Thank you so much for all of that information, both of you. That was wonderful. That looks like the last question. Thank you. Thanks for everyone participating and for your questions. We'd greatly appreciate it if you take our 3-question survey after this webinar ends. And the video of this webinar you'll get the link to it automatically in a Zoom follow-up email tomorrow. If you have further questions regarding this or any of the other webinars, please call or email me anytime. And with that, thank you, Keith and Lance, so much for your great presentations.
You bet. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for participating, and have a great day.